for a session produced by our underwriter PhRMA. Please welcome Stephen Benner, Senior Vice President of Oncology Development with Astellas, and Lori Riley, PhRMA's Executive Vice President of Policy, Research, and Membership.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Dr. Benner, for being with us today. Certainly over the last 5 years or so, we've seen tremendous progress in the field of oncology. I think the questions that researchers seem to be asking today are very different than even a decade ago. But certainly we have a long way to go, and there are a lot of challenges that remain. What are some of the biggest challenges that you face in your current job and quite honestly for other researchers that sit in similar shoes?
Well, certainly it's been a very exciting time. We're seeing the rate of progress is really quite rapid. When we design a clinical program now, there's likely to be approvals that could affect it from other new therapies or combinations that come through. At the same time, we're doing research on a new compound. So the pace of change has picked up dramatically, as has the number of agents under development and the number of clinical trials, which has really exploded, especially with combination therapies and immunotherapy.
I've heard it often described at Astellas that you have, quote, a science-first approach. What does that mean to you, and how does that impact your research?
Sure. Well, we start with our vision, which is using innovative science to create value for patients. And that means we start by looking for those aspects of science where we believe there might be a significant advantage to our exploration. Not pursuing multiple agents against the same targets, but looking for new areas of research. And that requires collaboration with academic physicians, with smaller biotech companies. And we've really been open to a wide variety of types of collaboration to try and pursue that science. As I said, given the pace of change right now, we really have to be quite flexible in terms of our approach towards the clinical development programs, which often change repeatedly during the time based on new information.
I want to talk for a minute about acute myeloid leukemia, or AML, because that's an area of research I know that's important to Astellas and other companies. What are you hoping to do in terms of changing the trajectory of that disease?
Sure. Well, acute myeloid leukemia, AML, as probably everyone knows, is a devastating disease. And for decades, we've relied on high-dose induction chemotherapy and, when possible, a stem cell transplant. But really, until just the last few years ago, we didn't have new drugs. What's happened now is we've started to identify specific mutations that are within the cancer cells, the leukemic cells, and be able to target specific therapies for them. One of those mutations is called FLT3, which occurs in about 30% of AML patients. And we've been able to develop an oral agent, a tyrosine inhibitor, that's able to put some patients with relapsed refractory AML into complete remission. So by understanding the biology of the disease, we're being much more successful in terms of identifying therapies that we think could make a real difference for patients.
Can we talk a minute maybe about companion diagnostics, because we're hearing a lot more that increasingly the number of particularly oncology medicines coming to market have a companion diagnostic associated with those therapies. Maybe if you can talk about, for example, in the AML product that you just referenced, the relationship with a companion diagnostic, and then also for other therapies that you're looking at.
Sure. So increasingly, our efforts are to try and identify the patients that would most benefit from a specific therapy. So not to treat every patient with AML or every patient with lung cancer, but to use the biology of the disease to understand which patients might benefit from a specific kind of therapy. So we developed a companion diagnostic in parallel with gilteritinib, our AML drug, so that we first proved that it was in fact true that patients that had that mutation would benefit the most from the therapy. And then we're using that diagnostic to select the patients for the trials who will ultimately benefit. Again, I think that the important point here is really trying to use the technologies that are available now, a basic understanding of the biology, to try and select out patient populations that would benefit from specific therapies. That way we save patients that wouldn't benefit from the potential side effects of taking a therapy that wouldn't be helpful to them. And we're able to provide the most benefit to those patients, in this case, the 30% of AML patients that have the FLT3 mutation.
I think the other point that's really important is obviously you want to make sure you get the right medicine to the right patient at the right time, But also from a cost perspective, understanding a lot of these therapies do have a big price tag associated with them, but if you can avoid using a therapy for a patient that you know it won't be successful in treating, it's also a potential benefit to the healthcare system and the patient as well from a cost savings perspective. You know, the other area in oncology that we're hearing a lot about is that of immunotherapy. How is Astellas thinking about immunotherapy as your company, and what do you think about the field going forward?
Well, it's certainly been a major advance, and I think that there were panels this morning, and you got a sense of the excitement around immunotherapy, especially the ability to take patients whose disease would have been very difficult to treat and induce long-term durable responses. That's, especially in solid tumors, is a significant advance. What we're doing now is to try and look beyond the first wave of immuno-oncology agents that were approved towards new targets, which may work with different mechanisms. We believe that probably immunotherapy, for the most part, will need to be given in combinations, so there's a lot of questions to be answered around patient selection again, about sequencing of those therapies. At Astellas, we are working on 3 novel targets. We have INDs open for all 3, 2 are already in the clinic. So we'll be looking for a new generation of IO agents to add on to the current products, because we believe that that's an area of tremendous promise, but unfortunately still most patients don't benefit from the currently available therapies.
We often hear in drug development that it's risky, right? We know it's risky, we know it's expensive. You know, on average, about 10% of medicines that make it from the very beginning of clinical research to actually being an approved product at the end of the day. So there are scientific hurdles that make getting a medicine approved challenging, but there's also regulatory hurdles. And it seems that with particularly the advent of a lot of these new therapies, the regulatory process can sometimes be a challenge too. How does Astellas and how are you approaching the regulatory process, for example, on some of your new therapies like your AML project?
Sure. Well, it's incredibly important for us as drug developers to collaborate with the health agencies, the FDA and the other health agencies that would regulate these drugs and ultimately approve them. And they've given us a number of opportunities to do that. So for gilteritinib, our AML drug, that was approved in Japan first. It's under review now by the FDA. And that was under a Sakigake, or a breakthrough designation. That allowed us to accelerate the approval of that drug. And in those discussions with both the FDA and with the Japanese Health Agency, during the time we were doing the pivotal trial, the trial intended to support registration, a new surrogate endpoint was accepted for regulatory purposes. So we have to be very flexible and have a lot of discussions, both with academic experts, with patient groups, and also with the regulatory agencies. So I would view it really as a collaborative approach. And the agencies now, through breakthrough therapy designation and other approaches, have been giving us new avenues to be able to talk about these therapies. It's important, given the number of drugs under development and the significant unmet need, for us to work as efficiently as possible. So we're trying to do that to answer the questions that we think are most important so we can get these drugs approved. But certainly while we're thinking of drug development from a development and approval perspective, there's a number of other policy areas that could impact drug development. Obviously, not only do we want to get these drugs developed, but we want to get them out to the patients that need them. And Laura, you're an expert in that area, so I'd be interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. The policy environment plays a critical role in terms of people's ability to access therapies. We're working on a number of initiatives with the hope of making these medicines more accessible to patients and having more information. So just a few of those with regards to how we pay for medicines. I think historically the way medicines were paid for is a doctor prescribes them and you pick them up, and regardless of whether it works for you or not, you're paying for it. We believe we need to evolve towards a system that we're actually paying for the outcomes that a medicine achieves. So if the medicine that you're prescribed works as it's supposed to, pharmaceutical companies should get paid the value for those products. But if instead the product doesn't work as it was intended, Companies may get paid nothing or significantly less. Surprisingly, that seems like common sense to almost everyone I talk to, but getting to that place is a challenge from a regulatory perspective, so we're working on that. The other thing we're working on is making sure patients have access to better information. So starting next year, when you see advertisements from pharmaceutical companies, they will direct you to a website that has information about how much those therapies are going to cost individual patients, whether that patient has insurance, whether they're on Medicare or Medicaid, or whether they're uninsured. On the flip side, though, there are also policies that are out there that could cause harm. We saw one recently proposed by the administration that seek to address a lot of the same medicines we're talking about today, those medicines that patients take in the Medicare program. The concern about this is that we could be moving towards a system that looks a lot more like Europe. And our concern is just from an access perspective. So let me give you one example. In Greece, about 8% of cancer medicines are available today relative to the US, where we see about 95% of all cancer medicines approved across the world are available here. We believe that our system in the US balances innovation with cost. We can certainly always improve on that, but what we don't want to do is move towards a system like we have in some countries where patients are unable to get the therapies, the kinds of therapies that we've been talking about today. So thank you very much, Dr. Benner, and thank you to the Atlantic for this event.
Thank you.